In my previous video I talked about my Hornby tender drive locomotives, and it was only after I'd finished filming it and published it on YouTube I suddenly remembered I'd left out two of my locomotives. They'd been sitting in the terminus station with trains, a train of carriages behind them, and I'd completely forgotten about them, which is a bit embarrassing, but hey, here they are. So the first one is Firth of Clyde. It's a Britannia class, and the model was made in China, probably in the early 2000s, but it's essentially the same model as Hornby were producing back in the 1980s from Margate, except that it's got chemically blackened valve gear, and it's also got a slightly better paint finish, I would say. It's tender driven with a 5-pole motor, so it runs pretty well, but it's a bit crude in some respects, and I'll just take a closer look at the front of the locomotive and you'll see what I mean. So if you look at the buffer beam, this model really dates back to the 1980s. You can probably see the fake sort of coupling hook at the front is just a moulded little blob of well, red plastic. It's nothing like a proper coupling hook. I also need to add some vacuum steam pipes, whatever they are, to the front buffer beam to detail a bit more. The other thing that's a bit lacking in this model, the smoke deflectors have simply moulded plastic handrails. The handrails on the side of the boiler are metal, separately fitted parts, and there's quite a nice little whistle there as well, but slightly crude overall. But I was pleased with this locomotive, pretty good runner. Let's see if we can just demonstrate it starting off. Zoom back a bit. Not a bad start. And on the outer loop, the upline, we have another Britannia, again made in China. This one's a weathered version. This one is Dornoch Firth. Now, both my Britannias are actually Scottish-based models, but I don't mind running them on the East Anglian Railway. They were just the ones that I could afford at the time. Again, tender-driven. This one is a later version, though, with a different moulding, or certainly some much improved parts to it. For example, it's got a proper coupling hook on the front, still lacking the steam pipe that I need to add to it, but it's also got separately fitted handrails on the much finer smoke deflectors. So in that sense, it's an improvement. It's also got finer valve gear that is weathered and chemically blackened, but it's the same, essentially the same model. The tender, I believe, is exactly the same. It's got the 5-pole motor made in China, and again, it's a fairly smooth runner. I'll see how good a start I can get it to do. Now I reckon that's as smooth as you'll get from a loco drive model. Now, I have owned earlier versions of Britannia in the past. I had a Triang version. Well, I didn't own it myself, but a pupil at the school I teach at had a Triang one with the synchro smoke effect that pumped smoke out of the chimney. And that used to run on our school model railway layout, but the problem was it had those great big thick Triang wheels, and it didn't really like the modern day Pico streamline points that much. Code 100, I'm not talking about Code 75, even Code 100 it didn't like. And I've also owned a Loco Drive recent Britannia, which was a very fine model, but I had to really decide to make way for a few models in my collection to save a bit of money a few years ago, so I sold that one. It was a good runner, but I don't think it was any better than this one, to be honest. Yeah, Dornoch Firth seems to start very smoothly. So, yeah, 2 more tender drive locos, and as I model the East Anglian line, supposedly the sort of London to Norwich line from Liverpool Street through Ipswich, a Britannia is almost essential, or a couple of Britannias are almost essential, because they are really the most powerful steam locomotives that operated on that line, although I use model as license and run whatever I like. But in theory, yes, the Britannias are what I should be modelling. Anyway, this one is now heading off to London, so let's let him take his train with him. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and see you again soon. Bye.